Hello, good morning or good afternoon from wherever you're tuning in from today, and welcome to the final automotive logistics live stream of the year, where we'll be wrapping up all of the key events, impacts, and lessons of 2025 all in the next hour. It's very ambitious, I know. But I'm Emily Wemedemo, Managing Editor at Automotive Logistics, and I'll be your host today. It's great to have you with us as we wrap up and what it has been a truly big, impactful year. 2025 has really kept us on our toes. Supply chains were tested by everything from capacity crunches and port congestion to new regulations and shifting trade dynamics. But through it all, we still saw incredible resilience and innovation in response. So, over the next hour, we'll look at some of those challenges and, more importantly, share what we've seen, some of those big key lessons navigating these disruptions. But before we dive in, here's a brief look at today's agenda. We cover 5 pillar topics here at Automotive Logistics, but we've really seen 3 of those themes come very to the forefront in the past year. That's localization, digitalization, and the EV transition. And that's all been underpinned by an overarching focus on resilience. So during today's show, I'll share some highlights from our conferences and interviews, and we'll bring in video clips so you can hear directly from some of the key industry voices as well. After that, we'll have 2 live discussions, first with Martin Corner from Aston Martin, a supply chain leader who has navigated major changes this year. And then we have our very own Christopher Ludwig, our Chief Content Officer, to help us wrap up some of the bigger lessons of 2025. So it's definitely a packed agenda. So I'm going to dive straight into it and start with the first theme of localization. So after many disruptions in recent years, from geopolitical tensions to natural disasters and even COVID, which feels almost 5 years ago now, but I think it is 5 years ago, is companies in 2025 put more focus than ever on localizing their supply chains to improve resilience. And of course, recent tariffs and trade barriers push companies to take a much harder look at their sourcing footprints, especially if they were relying on single source suppliers. Many OEMs started considering, dual sourcing critical components from different regions or helping key suppliers set up operations closer to their plants. But with all of those changes, they do take time. You can't duplicate tooling or qualify a new supplier just overnight. So in the meantime, localization efforts have all been around coordination and planning in real time. On the outbound side, that has meant not just reconsidering where vehicles are built or where parts come from, but even redesigning logistics networks to shorten supply lines and reduce risk. And simply assembling vehicles locally doesn't make a supply chain resilient overnight. True resilience really comes from localizing the wider supply chain base and the surrounding logistics flows, which is a complex multi-year journey that involves resetting supplier footprints, trade routes, and even port of entry. It also requires recognizing that long-standing practices, many like regional, looking at critical minerals in one area is no longer really making sense. We saw that especially with the chip supply crisis, with recent events involving Nexperia. This kind of transformation also often demands far closer collaboration between logistics and procurement teams, because sourcing strategy ultimately shapes how logistics networks are built. So whether it's Liberation Day with the cherry, which may have been the cherry on top for an industry exhausted from crisis firefighting, or if it was the tariff flare-ups at borders, ships getting stuck at ports, or just sudden custom changes that finally pushed things over the edge, the response this year was an industry pushing back by diversifying supplier footprints and building more regional buffers. Many companies set up new control towers to monitor cross-border flows in real time. They hired trade compliance experts to navigate the tsunami of new regulations. Some even decided to carry a bit more inventory on hand despite that extra expense, because the cost of missing parts and became higher than ever. And we heard this point being reinforced by a new goal. The Volkswagen Group of America's Executive Vice President of After Sales and Services, in a Red Sofa interview in September, he said the cost of redundancy today is less than the cost of reacting after the fact in a level of uncertainty. So now this push for regional resilience is happening globally. It even came up as a core theme at our ASEAN conference in October, but it's arguably been more visible in North America and Europe, in part due to this year's geopolitical events. And I won't bore you with every twist and turn in the tariff saga. We've just shared a tariff timeline in the chat so you can stay up to date on some of the movements happening there. But yet, despite all the political noise this year, most OEMs didn't suddenly uproot factories or abandon global platforms. Instead, they're definitely doubling down on visibility and agility, finding ways to keep product moving across borders, but with careful planning. So, as the news shared with us in September, rather than halting everything or rushing to localize manufacturing overnight, Volkswagen really focused on using data and regional integration to ride out the storm. He emphasized that uncertainty is still there, but VW has very much learned to live with it and building more flexibility, urgency, and backup into the supply chain, very much leaning into the uncertainty. So let's take a quick look now at how he described this shift in mindset.
I'd like to understand what the impact has been or how you're feeling it on the parts and service side in terms of the tariff implementation. What does it mean in the context of your supplier footprint and your service?
Well, one, thank you for asking about parts and service, right? It's, for most OEs, arguably one of the most profitable elements of the business that people tend to forget about, right behind financial services or right, in some cases above financial services. The simple answer is tariffs add cost. You have to decide as a company what your priority is. We have decided that continuing to provide service parts is priority number one. And we can get into a whole discussion about bad things that happen if your parts availability goes down, right? So if you continue to provide, now you've got the cost element of it. How do you deal with the cost element of it? And there's several cost levers, nothing that is going to offset the full burden of the tariff. But localization, yes. So our approach has been, let's make the supply chain more efficient. It gets you this much of it. Watch your overhead costs, all those kinds of things, gets you this much of it. Localization, start with parts that are not safety related, that are not tooling specific, that are arguably commodities, and get them set up here. So we are in a huge move towards localization.
So definitely a push there, and that's and the point on service coming first, so you know that doesn't stop. And I suppose there's a parallel with vehicle logistics there too, because obviously the decision was made to continue to deliver and distribute, and not let the tariffs block that.
Yeah, I mean, one slight difference between parts and vehicles. We made the decision to slow down the vehicle supply chain, to buy time to let things settle, right? Because you get a date, oh, maybe there might be some reduction or movement here. That date comes, nothing changes, right? So all you've done is backed up the supply chain, right? Which is why the redundancy and flexibility all comes in. But on parts, from day one, we said keep the supply chain moving, do not slow it down, and if need be, accelerate it by flying. So that there is a distinction between the two.
But now localization really isn't just about avoiding the trade wars either. It's really about speed to market as well. We're seeing companies are reconfiguring their networks to shorten lead times and stay closer to the customer. And we're staying within the Volkswagen family. For an example here, the company made a notable move this year in Europe by opening a new vehicle handling port in Venice, Italy. It's part of a strategy to shift some export flows away from Northern Europe towards the south, closer to markets like the Eastern Mediterranean and even Asia, and to build resilience by creating more routing options. And back in April, on our finished vehicle logistics live stream, turning trade changes into network games, Peter Hernlein, Volkswagen Group's managing director of vehicle logistics, shared some of these key lessons with us on the Venice project. So I'm hoping to share a clip of that with you now.
Peter, for you and your perspective, what have been some of the major lessons learned from this year, from the ongoing challenges that we face and discussed at length here, and how will they shape VW's future vehicle logistics strategies and network designs?
Yeah. So what was really a key learning is, but I think it's not only this year, but that learning started a couple of years ago already. Once you have a setup, you cannot take it for granted that it will be in a stable mode with predictable volumes, with predictable market demands. So I think when you create a structure, create a network, you have to build in a lot more flexibility and the need to react and adapt to changing circumstances. So these changes in flexibility upwards, but also downwards, we are basically reflecting in the concepts. We are also discussing with our partners and building in the contracts. And for sure, you also need backup solutions. So if one element of the network or one element struggles, you need to be able to move either from rail to road or from road to rail to switch from one port to the other. And these things need to be considered. And the Port of Venice, what we discussed, is a prime example to build in so-called resilience. If we have a struggle in the northern port, we can also allocate other volumes to the south or vice versa. And for sure, also a big lessons learned is that you need to exchange information in a quite frequent, in a transparent way with all of the partners within the automotive supply chain. And we have also created a tool, our so-called outbound order book, which really helps us to communicate using communication standards, sharing information quite transparently and frequently. And we are also having high frequent meetings with our key service providers and strategic partners to really reflect what's the tendency, what's the developments we see, and how can we adapt to it.
Fantastic. So one of my biggest takeaways from that FEL live stream was Peter's point that you can't assume your network will stay stable. OEMs have to constantly build in that flexibility into their supply chain. And a resilient network is not just about the ports either. Peter mentioned they're constantly reviewing the mix of transport modes too. If rail capacity tightens, they can shift more volume onto trucks and vice versa. But critically underpinning all of this flexibility is better information sharing. Volkswagen created a digital outbound order book tool to give all of its logistics partners a real-time shared view of vehicle orders and movements. And by communicating frequently and transparently, VW and its carriers can really anticipate that volume swings or delays and adapt together. So it's really that kind of end-to-end visibility, essentially an integrated outbound control tower is quickly becoming a must-have for resilience across the industry. And VW really isn't alone here. There's signs of the vehicle logistics sector moving towards a more regional, multi-node network instead of relying on just a few giant hubs for entry. We also saw a new port terminal capacity open this year in the Riviera, and that project was by RS Altman. So I also just want to note here, because we have been exploring some of those themes around flexibility, visibility, and vehicle distribution optimization, that we will be covering these topics in a lot more detail at our Finished Vehicle Logistics North America 2026 conference in April. If you're interested, please do go ahead and scan the QR code on your screens now, or visit the Automotive Logistics website for more details. We would definitely love to see you there.